Alright, let me tell you about this really unsettling experience I had on a train a while back. It's one of those things that, even now, I'm not entirely sure how to explain. So, I was taking a late night train to visit a friend in another city. It wasn't supposed to be anything special, just a regular trip. I had done this route plenty of times before, so I wasn't expecting anything out of the ordinary. I got to the station around 9 p.m. It was already pretty quiet, with only a few people waiting on the platform. The train pulled in right on time, but it looked a bit different than usual. Older, maybe? The paint was faded, and the windows were kind of foggy, like they hadn't been cleaned in a while. I thought it was weird, but not weird enough to make a big deal out of it. I figured they just put an older train on the route that night. I got on and found a seat near the middle of the car. The train wasn't packed, but there were enough people around that I didn't feel alone. I sat down, put on my headphones, and settled in for the ride. Everything seemed normal at first. The train started moving, and I was just listening to music, staring out the window, watching the city lights fade as we got further out. About half an hour in, though, I started to notice something odd. The train was moving along fine, but the lights in the car started to flicker. Not just a little, like a full-on flicker. They would dim, then brighten up again, almost like they were struggling to stay on. It was annoying, but I didn't think much of it at first. Trains have issues all the time, right? Maybe there was a power problem or something. But then, after a few minutes, the flickering stopped, and the lights just went out completely. Like, the whole car was plunged into darkness. Everyone around me kind of shifted in their seats, but no one said anything. It was this weird, tense silence, like we were all waiting for something to happen. I pulled off my headphones and looked around, trying to see if anyone knew what was going on, but everyone just seemed as confused as I was. A few seconds later, the emergency lights kicked in, but they were dim, just enough to cast this eerie, yellowish glow over everything. It was unsettling, to say the least. And that's when I noticed something else. The people around me were all sitting weirdly still, like they weren't moving at all. No one was talking or even looking around. They were just sitting there, staring straight ahead. It was like they were frozen or something. I felt this chill run down my spine, but I tried to stay calm. Maybe they were just as freaked out as I was and didn't know what to do. But the longer I sat there, the more uneasy I felt. Something was off. Way off. I glanced out the window, trying to distract myself, but all I could see was darkness. No lights, no signs of where we were. Just this endless black void outside. It didn't make any sense. We were supposed to be passing through towns and cities, but there was nothing out there. Suddenly, the train came to this abrupt stop. It wasn't a smooth, gradual stop like when you reach a station. It was a jarring, sudden halt that nearly threw me out of my seat. I looked around, expecting someone to explain what was going on, but no one moved. No one even reacted. They just sat there, still as statues. I started to panic a little. I got up from my seat, thinking maybe I could find a conductor or someone who knew what was happening. As I made my way down the aisle, I kept looking at the other passengers, hoping for some kind of response, but they were all just blank, like they weren't really there. I reached the end of the car and opened the door to the next one, hoping I'd find someone, anyone who could tell me what was going on. But when I stepped into the next car, it was empty, completely empty, not a single person in sight. I walked through it, feeling this growing sense of dread. Where was everyone? I moved to the next car and the next, but they were all the same. Empty, dark, and silent. I started to feel like I was in some kind of nightmare, like I was trapped on this endless train with no way out. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe everyone had moved to the front cars for some reason, but why? And where were the conductors? I decided to head back to my seat. Maybe I just imagined the weirdness. Maybe I was overreacting. But when I got back to the car I'd been in, it was empty too. All those people who were just sitting there, frozen, they were gone. I stood there, in the middle of the car, feeling this cold, creeping fear take over me. What the hell was happening? That's when I heard it. This faint, scraping sound coming from the back of the car. It was soft, but in the silence, it sounded loud as hell. I turned around slowly, my heart pounding in my chest, and looked toward the back of the car. The door to the next car was open, just a crack, and I could see something moving in the darkness beyond it. Something was there. Something was watching me. I wanted to run, to get the hell out of there, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. I couldn't move, couldn't look away. The scraping sound got louder, closer, like it was coming right towards me. I backed up slowly, my eyes locked on that dark space beyond the door. And then, all of a sudden, the door slammed shut with a loud bang, making me jump. That snapped me out of it. I turned and ran, not caring where I was going, just needing to get away. I ran through car after car, my heart pounding in my ears, the emergency lights flickering around me. I didn't stop until I reached the very front of the train, where I finally found someone. It was the conductor, but something was wrong with him. He was standing there, staring straight ahead, his face pale and blank, just like the passengers had been. I called out to him, but he didn't respond. He just stood there, like he was in some kind of trance. I grabbed his arm, trying to shake him out of it, but he didn't even blink. It was like he was frozen in place, not even aware of what was happening around him. I felt this wave of panic wash over me. I was alone, completely alone on this train with whatever that thing was in the back. I let go of the conductor and backed away, trying to figure out what to do. My phone had no signal, and there was no way I was going back through those cars. I was trapped, with nowhere to go and no one to help me. I don't know how long I stood there, trying to calm myself down, trying to make sense of what was happening. But then I felt it again. That presence, that cold, creeping feeling that something was watching me. I turned around slowly, and there it was. It was standing at the other end of the car, just standing there, in the shadows. I couldn't see its face, couldn't make out any details, but I knew it was looking at me. I could feel its eyes on me, feel its gaze piercing right through me. And then it started to move, slowly, steadily, coming towards me. I stumbled back, my heart racing, my mind screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, just like the others had been. I watched as it got closer and closer until it was just a few feet away from me, and then it stopped. It just stood there, right in front of me, this dark, faceless figure. I could feel its presence, feel the cold radiating off of it, but I couldn't do anything. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I was trapped, completely at its mercy. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. 1 second it was there, the next, it was like it had never been there at all. I was alone again, standing in the middle of the car, my heart racing, my body shaking. I don't remember much after that. Somehow, I made it off the train. I don't know how, I don't know when, but I did. The next thing I remember is standing on the platform of some station, gasping for breath, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I never figured out what it was, what I saw, what happened to the others. I've tried to rationalize it, tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, just a trick of the light or a weird dream. But deep down, I know it wasn't. I know what I saw, what I felt, and it was real. I've taken the train home from work more times than I can count. It's part of my routine, you know? You get used to the sounds, the people, the rhythm of it all. It's a sort of comfort, really, until it isn't. This one night stands out, though. I still get chills thinking about it. It was a typical Thursday evening. I remember because I had a long day at the office, one of those days where nothing seems to go right. By the time I left work, it was already dark outside, and all I wanted was to get home, throw on some comfortable clothes, and maybe binge watch something to forget about the day. I made my way to the station, just like always, and waited for the train. The platform was quieter than usual, which was a bit odd considering it wasn't that late yet. But hey, maybe I was just lucky for once. The train pulled in, and as the doors opened, I noticed that the carriage was almost empty. Perfect, I thought. I could use some peace and quiet. I stepped in and took a seat by the window. It's funny how quickly you fall into habits. Same seat, same routine. I pulled out my phone, ready to scroll mindlessly until my stop. The train started moving, and for a while, everything was normal. The soft hum of the train on the tracks, the occasional announcement, the familiar sights flashing by the window. I was zoning out, already halfway into my nothing matters mindset. After a couple of stops, something felt off. We were cruising along, but then the train slowed down. Not in the way it does when it's approaching a station. This was different. It was more like we were losing power. The lights flickered a bit, which made my heart skip a beat, but they stayed on, so I shrugged it off. Must be some technical issue, I thought. No big deal. Then the train came to a complete stop. We weren't at a station. We were just sitting there, somewhere in the middle of the track. I glanced around, expecting some kind of announcement, an explanation, but there was nothing. Just silence. The kind that makes you realize how loud your own breathing is. I looked around the carriage, trying to gauge if anyone else was as unsettled as I was. There were only a few other passengers. A guy in a suit who looked half asleep, a woman reading a book, and a couple of teenagers with their headphones in, oblivious to the world. No one seemed to be freaking out, so I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting. Minutes passed, and the train still didn't move. My eyes kept darting to the door, half expecting someone to come through and explain what was going on. Still nothing. I was starting to get this uneasy feeling, like something wasn't right. I don't know how to explain it, but you know when your gut is just telling you that something's off? That was the feeling. I pulled out my phone again to check if there were any alerts about train delays, but of course there was no signal. Great. Just great. I tried to connect to the train's Wi-Fi, but that wasn't working either. I could feel my anxiety creeping in, that tight feeling in your chest when you know you're not in control of the situation. Suddenly, the train lights went out completely. For a second, I thought I might have blacked out, but no, it was just pitch dark. I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. I heard a few gasps and murmurs from the other passengers, but mostly there was just silence. That thick, suffocating kind of silence. My first instinct was to turn on my phone's flashlight, but then I hesitated. Something told me not to. Like, maybe it was better if I didn't see what was around me. My heart was pounding now, and I could feel sweat starting to form on my palms. I just sat there, holding my breath, waiting for something to happen. And then I heard it. A faint sound like footsteps, but not the kind you'd expect on a train. These were slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere up ahead. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it. There shouldn't be anyone walking around when the train's in the middle of the tracks. I mean, where would they even be going? The footsteps got louder, and I swear they were coming closer. I wanted to move, to get up and find out what was going on, but I was frozen in my seat. It was like my body was telling me to stay put, not to draw attention to myself. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, drowning out everything else. Then, just as suddenly as they had started, the footsteps stopped. I held my breath, straining to listen for any other sounds. Nothing, just silence. My mind was playing tricks on me, conjuring up images of what could be out there in the dark. Was it someone who worked for the train company? A passenger? Something else? The lights flickered back on, and I almost jumped out of my seat. The train was still motionless, but at least I could see again. I looked around, trying to spot anything out of place, but everything seemed normal. The other passengers were still there, all of them looking just as confused and uneasy as I felt. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The guy in the suit, the one who had been half asleep when I first got on, was now wide awake, sitting up straight, staring at me. No, not just at me, but past me, like he was looking at something or someone right behind me. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing up. I didn't want to turn around, but I had to know what he was looking at. Slowly, I turned my head, my eyes darting to the seat behind me. It was empty. There was no one there. I whipped my head back around to look at the guy, but now he was staring straight ahead again, as if nothing had happened. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to get off this train. I stood up, my legs feeling like they were made of jelly, and made my way to the door. As I reached the door, I felt this sudden rush of cold air. It wasn't like the usual air conditioning on the train. This was different. It was like walking into a freezer. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter around me. What the hell was going on? I reached for the emergency intercom, but as I did, the train jolted back to life. It started moving again, slowly at first, then picking up speed. I stumbled, grabbing onto a handrail to steady myself. The lights flickered again, but this time they stayed on. I looked around, and everything seemed normal again. The passengers were settling back into their seats, and the guy in the suit had closed his eyes like he was trying to go back to sleep. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But as I sat back down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I kept glancing at the other passengers. trying to gauge if they had experienced the same thing, but they all seemed calm, almost too calm. It was like they were pretending nothing had happened. We were nearing my stop, and I couldn't wait to get off that train. The second the doors opened, I was out of there, practically sprinting towards the exit. I didn't look back. I didn't want to. I just wanted to be as far away from that train as possible. As I walked home, I tried to rationalize what had happened. Maybe it was just a power outage. Maybe I was tired, and my mind was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. There was something on that train, something I couldn't explain. I've taken the train since then, but I'm always on edge, always watching for anything out of the ordinary. Every creak, every flicker of the lights sends my heart racing. I tell myself it's nothing, that it's just paranoia, but I can't shake the feeling that it could happen again, that I might find myself in that darkness, hearing those footsteps, wondering what's behind me. Alright, so this happened a few years ago. I had this conference in another city, and the best way to get there was by train. It was about a 5-hour ride, and I thought it would be a good idea to just sit back, maybe catch up on some sleep, and avoid the stress of driving. I usually enjoy train rides. There's something peaceful about just watching the world go by through the window. I got to the station around 7 p.m., grabbed a coffee, and made my way to the platform. The train was one of those older models, the kind with the faded blue seats and wood paneling that makes you feel like you're stepping back in time. There was something oddly comforting about it, so I wasn't bothered at all. I found my seat in the middle of the car, settled in, and got ready for the journey. As the train started moving, I noticed it was pretty empty. Maybe it was because it was a late train on a weekday, but there were only a handful of people scattered throughout the car. I shrugged it off, put on my headphones, and started scrolling through my phone. Everything seemed normal, just another quiet train ride. About an hour into the trip, I decided to take a walk to the dining car. I figured I'd grab a snack or something. As I walked through the cars, I noticed how eerily quiet everything was. You could usually hear the hum of conversation, the clatter of people moving about, but this time it was just silence. It was a bit unsettling, but I chalked it up to most people being tired or just keeping to themselves. When I got to the dining car, I realized I was the only one there. The attendant was sitting behind the counter, reading a magazine, and didn't even look up as I approached. I asked for a sandwich and a soda, and he handed them over without saying a word. It was a bit awkward, but I paid and went back to my seat. As I made my way back, I glanced into each car, noticing how empty they seemed. Maybe it was the dim lighting, or maybe it was just my imagination, but I started feeling uneasy. It was like something was off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I pushed the thought away and settled back into my seat, trying to distract myself with my phone. Another hour passed, and I started to doze off. The gentle rocking of the train was lulling me to sleep when I was suddenly jolted awake by a loud bang. I looked around, confused, trying to figure out what had happened. The other passengers were still in their seats, not reacting at all. I figured it was probably just the train hitting something on the tracks, but my heart was racing. I took a deep breath and tried to relax, but then I noticed something strange. There was this guy sitting a few rows ahead of me, wearing a dark hoodie. I hadn't seen him before, and he was sitting completely still, staring straight ahead. I don't know why, but there was something about him that made me uneasy. Maybe it was the way he was sitting, so rigid, or maybe it was just the fact that I hadn't noticed him earlier. I kept an eye on him, just in case. The train continued on, and after a while, I started to feel a bit more at ease. But then, out of nowhere, the train lights flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. It was like something out of a horror movie. I heard a few gasps from the other passengers, and then it was silent again, except for the sound of the train moving on the tracks. I sat there, frozen, trying to figure out what to do. My mind was racing. Should I get up and try to find someone who worked on the train? Should I just stay put? As I was debating with myself, the lights flickered back on. I let out a sigh of relief, but that relief was short-lived. The guy in the hoodie was now sitting one row closer to me. I hadn't heard him move, and I didn't see him get up. He was still sitting perfectly still, staring straight ahead. My heart was pounding. What the hell was going on? I decided I needed to get out of there. I grabbed my bag and stood up. trying to act casual as I made my way to the door at the end of the car. I glanced back, and the guy was still sitting there, not moving an inch. I moved into the next car, which was completely empty. The air felt heavier in there, like it was harder to breathe. I kept walking, trying to put as much distance between myself and that guy as possible. I passed through a couple more cars, all empty, until I reached the front of the train. I found a conductor and asked him what was going on. He gave me this blank look and said everything was fine, just a minor technical glitch. But there was something in his eyes that didn't sit right with me. He looked off, like he was forcing himself to act normal. I thanked him and went back to my seat, feeling more confused than ever. I sat down, trying to shake off the unease, but it was impossible. Every time I glanced around, I half expected to see that guy in the hoodie again, but he was nowhere to be found. Maybe he'd gotten off at the last stop, or maybe he was in another car. I didn't know, and at that point, I didn't care. I just wanted this ride to be over. About an hour later, we finally pulled into the station. I grabbed my things and practically ran off the train, not even bothering to look back. I felt this overwhelming sense of relief as soon as I stepped onto the platform. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that it was all in my head. But then, as I was walking away, I glanced back one last time. The guy in the hoodie was standing on the platform, just staring at me. He didn't say anything, didn't move, just stood there with that blank expression. My stomach dropped, and I turned away, not daring to look back again. I hurried to the exit, my heart pounding in my chest. For days after that, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I left the house, I'd catch myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see that guy following me. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but I couldn't get rid of that nagging feeling. I never found out who that guy was or what he was doing on that train. Maybe he was just some weirdo, or maybe it was all just a coincidence. But part of me thinks there was something more to it, something that I'll never understand. Since then, I've been a bit wary of taking late-night trains. You never really know who you're sharing that space with or what their intentions might be. Looking back on it now, I wonder if I should have done something different. Should I have reported it to someone? Should I have tried to talk to that guy, figure out what his deal was? But in the moment, all I wanted to do was get away, to put as much distance between myself and that train as possible. So yeah, that's my story. It might not sound like much, but it still gives me chills just thinking about it. Sometimes the scariest things aren't the ones that jump out at you, but the things that lurk in the shadows, watching and waiting.